Good afternoon. This is the 8th installment of a series known as The Woman with 1.5 Hands. Parts 1 through 7 should be enjoyed before you carry on here any further. Oh, and in order too, if at all possible. Otherwise, you'll be lost. That said, here's part 8, or more, on cognitive dissonance. At the end of part 7, I got stuck trying to figure out how an estimated 302,000 women could end up being raped an estimated 876,000 times, all within the same 12-month time period and during the mid-90s. Bewildered. Perplexed. Anyway, like I said in the first of this series, this is not supposed to be a mystery. But, so then I went back to the original source, the National Violence Against Women Survey itself, and read about Jay Bentone's multiplier, 2.9. I do not know how I missed this one the first time. Anyway, each then recent rape victim said she'd been raped an average of 2.9 times, all within 12 months prior to taking the survey. So Jay Bentone called 24 rape magnets? Now, hold on. I will explain my use of this term in short order. I swear I have a good reason. Well, okay, but did they call or did they not call 24 rape magnets? Not exactly. 86% of these raped more than once rape victims said they'd been raped by only one man during the previous year. I imagine a typical feminist might weigh in right about here with something like, okay, that's it. He's too callous and caustic. I mean, he even used the word funny. This rape magnet thing, that's it. Last straw. Quote unquote. First off, I don't think rape is funny. Dr. Faulkner used that word, and in part 7 of this series, I was merely quoting her when she referred to aliens as, quote, funny little green people, end quote. Moreover, how Terrico, or the anti-rape industrial complex, distorts rape statistics is not funny. I'm attempting to address the salient features of this distortion now. No matter how you slice it, though, this is no time to let down one's guard in terms of what really needs to be guarded against. No matter what the statistics, if you were raped, your personal number is 100%. And while you need comforting and justice, other women don't need to hear or read about distorted rape information that only increases their chances of being raped. Hello? Anyway, of course Jay Bentone didn't call 24 women who should be blamed for their own rapes. Again, if a man rapes a woman, he's 100% responsible for that rape, and she's 0% responsible for that rape. But I had thought I had seen the face of rape, and this 2.9 multiplier changes things. And yes, initially I was shocked and in disbelief, and I kind of sort of tried to reenact that shock and disbelief just now by using the term rape magnet. Also, evidently what I've seen while viewing the face of rape, as it were, has also been a reenactment, and it's not even close to the statistical reality. Yes, I have seen photos of raped women, black eyes, cheeks all swollen and black and blue, bloody fat lips, lacerations, their hair all disheveled and broken arms, and... Okay, so the thing is, the cops also saw this same visual, in person, her blood dripping right there in front of them, and the doctors and nurses not only saw her in the emergency ward, often they touched her injuries or heard her labored breathing as she tried to breathe through a broken nose. And then 76% of the time, she told these trained professionals that her husband or her ex-husband, or her boyfriend or her ex-boyfriend, or someone she had voluntarily dated at least once had done this to her. And because the victim knew where the rapist lived in most of these cases, it was easy for the cops to find, and then there's a trial, and then prison. But then the rapist gets out of prison within 12 months and rapes her again. More doctors, more cops, another trial, more prison time. And then he gets out on parole for the second time in a year and rapes her a third time? Again, there's a reason why this is called on cognitive dissonance. As mentioned earlier, I've never raped and I've never been raped. But shouldn't I know a little bit more about rape so that I can comprehend how so many women can be raped an average of 3 times apiece, and yes, I'm rounding up from 2.9 to 3, if you'll pardon my rounding, with all these separate rapes happening in a 12-month window of time, and 86% of these women saying that only one man committed the horrific act each time? Also, it should be noted, I was in such disbelief I went back to the bookstore and found out that Jade and Tone are not alone in this area. Acerno, Resnick, Kilpatrick, Saunders, and Best, while conducting a longitudinal study of 3,000 women, found that women who had been victimized before were 7 times more likely to be raped again. And that's out of the Journal of Anxiety Disorders, 1999. I'm at a loss. Rape is a horrendous crime, but, according to the NVAWS, the police hear about it only 19.1% of the time. How could that be? Broken bones, bruises, blood dripping out of her ears, earrings torn off, or wait, this just in 70% of all police reports where women say they were raped, these women exhibit no physical injuries other than a slight redness around the crotch, redness that in and of itself does not point toward violent sexual intercourse. Found 2 sources for this stat, both listed in the addenda. Scrambling now, shoulders involuntarily shrugging, many synapses pulsing with the search for even one plausible answer to this conundrum. Could it be deviousness? In other words, does the reason why most members of Terrico adamantly insist that only about 1 in 5 rapes are reported to the police perhaps have anything to do with these rapists being so devious that in the middle of a clearly emotionally charged moment, which is to say in the middle of a rape, somehow 70% of the time these rapists have the presence of mind to make sure to not leave a mark? If that were the case, that would be pretty devious, if that were the case. Also, if one recalls the first time I used the word rape in this, way back in part 1, I used it like this: rape is first and foremost a crime of violence. And that's not mine, by the way. It's a statement that's so true and so common, and it's been uttered and written so many times that it's become a cliché. And a lot of times that's why statements become clichés, because the overwhelming majority think they're true. Until now. Really? Really? Is this the time to start having it that rape isn't violent when it's convenient? How about here's a better idea. Let's just keep it like it is. Rape is a crime of violence. Enough said. Since rape truly is a crime of violence, then, how does one who is bent on administering some damage to a woman deliver to her what is through and through an act of violence? And yet, 70% of the time, the medical and forensic professionals who are paid to help law enforcement differentiate between rape and that which is not rape end up writing in their reports that this woman's body exhibits none of the physiological signatures of rape other than some of his sperm are swimming around in her vagina. He's so smart, he knows to not leave a mark. But he's so stupid that he's never heard that the DNA in his sperm in her vagina might lead to him being convicted of rape? Question. His victim doesn't want to have sex, but in the process of him taking it from her anyway, and while she's squirming away from him, he somehow doesn't have to exert any force, evidence of which would be very visible under a microscope? How does a rapist grip someone so firmly that he can reposition her body back to a position conducive to having sex, and he can do this while she's trying to squirm away and with a lot of force commensurate with trying to stop him from raping her, and then after he exerts that kind of gripping force, a mark is somehow not administered to the victim's body in 70% of these cases? And x-rays don't reveal evidence indicative of rape either? In my crystal ball, I see some are thinking about deadly weapons right about now. No, I'm not trying to be willfully ignorant here, but if he did brandish a gun or a knife immediately prior to or during his commission of this crime, how could he possibly perpetrate this heinous activity an average of 2 or more times within that same year? The police would know about that weapon. How could he have avoided less than a year behind bars so that he could have the opportunity to rape her those multiple times? Her doctors and nurses said there's no sign of a struggle. Why wouldn't she tell the police about his Glock or his Bowie knife? Here's another possible reason as to why only 19.1% of the women who told Jaden and Tone about being victims of a particular rape also told the police about that same rape. They were both in on it. Him, because he's cunning. Her, she doesn't want the police to think of her as a boy who cries wolf. Simply put, her rapist doesn't leave a mark, and she really got raped. He knows it and she knows it. But she thinks she doesn't have a good case against him, and she's heard that it needs to be cut and dried, or else it's a huge hassle for her and he might get off scot-free. So instead of this rape possibly being case one of a series of cases that the police grow less and less interested in, she decides to sit on it, hoping that her husband makes a mistake next time, a convictable mistake. And this time she's installed a hidden camera to videotape it. Put another way, it's like a first-time homebuyer loan. The first time she tells the police she was raped, she figures they'll listen raptly. In other words, she'll get a good deal on how little she has to pay in taxes compared to how much they'll listen, how seriously they'll take her, and how much they'll spend on gathering and testing forensic evidence, etc. But if they don't get a conviction, they won't listen so well during her second visit. After 2 acquittals, and she's still with the same guy, every time the cops see her, they'll be rolling their eyes, saying, "Oh boy, here she comes again," which is not the kind of reaction she wants from the cops, which is why she becomes part of the 80.9% who don't call the cops on her rapist, but will tell people like Jaden and Tone about it. Sometimes the simplest answers are the best answers. How about just move out? Some guy's savagely raping you, and he's so evil and conniving that in the middle of all that fury, he's careful to not leave a mark. Isn't that a good time to leave? And of course I mean leave and call the police on him. Get him off the streets. I don't want him raping my sister either. Often, though, women don't leave. Reasons? I have my suspicions, but this seems like a good time to sample a few words from Dr. Nancy Faulkner's Why Women Stay. Quote, "It can be truly confusing to people on the outside looking in, wondering why a woman would stay with a man who rapes her. Those who don't understand say things like, 'I'd leave him in a heartbeat if he ever did that to me. It would only take one time.' And yet, despite repeated assaults, many women remain with the men who rape them. There can be many reasons, with more than one contributing to the problem. The categories are not discrete, with many overlapping characteristics among the arbitrary divisions." End quote. Her strong suit is definitely the safety seeker. Here goes. Quote, "The safety seeker category is probably the concept that is most difficult for people to understand." End quote. And I gotta break in here for a quick aside. You gotta love it how she introduces both the entire pamphlet and this particular section of the pamphlet with a patronizing pat on the reader's head, a gentle tisking, "Aww," and by telling us the equivalent of, if we'd only swallowed more smart water and used it to wash down more fish and more ginkgo biloba, then our brains wouldn't be so much smaller than hers. Anyway, back to the doctor. "People," she continues, "tend to move toward relationships that are familiar and thus most comfortable. Comfort, in this sense, does not necessarily mean physical or emotional contentment, but rather comfort in the sense of having lived in similar situations. Superficially, it seems easier to deal with the known and expected than with uncertainty. For example, There are women who repeatedly marry alcoholic men. In a therapeutic session with a woman in her 40s, we reviewed her life and relationships. She had been married 7 times to 7 alcoholics. Between each marriage, and consistent throughout her life, was one man who was not an alcoholic. She admitted truly enjoying his company, but never married him and could not figure out why. Her father was an alcoholic. She grew up with and understood living with alcoholism. She knew from her mother how to be the wife of an alcoholic, and knew how to live in the dysfunction of alcoholism. She seemed to keep going back to what was most familiar, and thus most comfortable. For brevity, this is necessarily a simplified explanation. To explain further, if a spaceship landed in your front yard, the door opened, and funny little green people came out, you might be frightened. What if I assured you, though, that these were very friendly people, that they would take you to live on another planet in a stress-free paradise, but you could never return to what you now know as life on Earth? Would you go with the aliens? End quote. I'll return with her answer in just 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, and after some analysis of her analogy. Who is she talking to, and what is she really talking about? Her pamphlets might have all women readers in mind, but her last 5 paragraphs, in other words, what I've read to you in the last minute or two, are centered around the type of advice she dispensed to women sitting on the couch in her clinic. Professional advice. Who are most of the women she schedules appointments with? Those who make less than 15 grand a year and get raped 3 times as often, or those who make over 15 grand? Yes, some women who make less than 15,000 a year visit counselors, but without making too many assumptions about class, I'd like to continue this discussion and have it be a given that most of the women she sees on her couch have a certain status to maintain, evidenced by the fact that they can afford a session or more with her. So, roughly that's who she's talking to, but what's she really saying? Aliens didn't really land, didn't really offer a stress-free paradise. It's up to us to interpret what that stress-free situation really is, or would be, to a probably middle or upper-class woman sitting on the doctor's couch. I propose paradise would be either 1, this woman getting together with a different man, a man who has more money than her current situation, or 2, she unexpectedly receives a windfall and, as a newly single woman, should she choose to become newly single, she can at least maintain, if not improve upon her current lifestyle, with or without custody of her kids if she has any. Leaving a low-income man who rapes you, leaving him to go be with a man who has more money, that's exactly and precisely what American women do. They leave the rapist, they turn him into the police, and they move in with the man who's loaded. The kind of rapist she stays with, on the other hand, is the man who has money. If she's married to a man with money, and he rapes her, and then she has the opportunity to go to a low-class rape shelter and be surrounded by a bunch of low-income women, then she'll choose instead to stay with what she's familiar with. She'll stay with a rapist with money, and that money will remind her of the kind of money she either grew up with or has grown accustomed to. To a middle or upper-class woman, a rape shelter, literally teeming with low-income women, is like boarding a spaceship with aliens. It's weird or strange or alien, if you will, to a woman of means to suddenly find herself cheek by jowl with so many poor women. These ideas are actually not new and not mine. Lois Rathus, Spencer Rathus, and Jeff Nevid found that, quote, rape-free societies were characterized by sexual equality in which both genders shared economic power and were deemed to make important contributions, albeit in different ways, to the welfare of the society, end quote. Others, like Pepper Schwartz and Virginia Rudder, also chime in, quote, the more egalitarian and integrated the society, the less rape, end quote. Even Jaden and Tone admit that, quote, wife assault is more common in families where power is concentrated in the hands of the husband or male partner, and the husband makes most of the decisions regarding family finances." End quote. More corroboration appears in my notes. But back to Dr. Faulkner's question. Does this raped woman stay with the rapist she's married to and maintain her country club membership and continue sailing with him on his yacht and more, or does she go with the aliens? Probably not, Dr. Faulkner writes. You probably wouldn't go with the aliens because you haven't been to their planet, you don't know if you can trust me, and you don't know what to expect. You'd probably stay where you are, despite creditors banging on the door, a leaking roof, your mother-in-law living with you, standing daily in the unemployment line, your daughter prostituting herself, and your son in jail for dealing drugs. End quote. Here's where cognitive dissonance truly rears its ugly head. Either Rathus, Neva, Schwartzbretter, and I have the class mechanisms of rape completely upside down and inside out, or Nancy Faulkner, Ph.D., does. Now, I could be wrong, but for some reason I tend to associate hostile visits from creditors, unemployment, and rooming with a mother-in-law who can't afford her own place with low-income indicators or situations like rape shelters. Why would it be that much of a fall downward in class trappings to go from what's in the previous paragraph to a rape shelter? The answer couldn't be more obvious. It's not a drop-off at all. So with him already being low-income, unemployed, and creditors after him, etc., if he then also rapes her, of course she's going to make the sideways, not downward, leap to a rape shelter. Why women stay is when the money's good and they get raped, and they don't want to go to where the money's not so good, like a rape shelter. It's as if the good doctor flip-flops the rape indicators with the low-income indicators, and it gets all tragically reversed, so that if a woman listens to psychologists like Dr. Faulkner, her chances of staying with a well-off rapist only increase. Her chances of leaving a low-income working stiff, even though he doesn't rape or abuse her, only increase, which, if she does leave this non-raping, non-abusive plain worker bee, would then increase her chances of getting together with a guy with money, whom she'd have a harder time leaving. And so this second guy would then start taking liberties, start thinking he's bought and paid for certain services of hers that for all he can tell she really is offering in trade, although she's not. WWNN. By the way, WWNN, just Google it. Dr. Faulkner uses the bottle to disguise and veil what's really happening in these abusive relationships. And to the degree that a woman listens to this doctor and those like her is the same degree that she raises her own chances of being raped by the likeliest of candidates, a man she'd date or marry, which is to say, a man she'd probably not shake her keys at. While reviewing the last movement, I realized it contains the germ of a theory. What if there were a way for women who made less than $15,000 a year to not get raped 3 times as often as those who made more than that? More to the point, what if it could be arranged that these low-income women got raped at the same frequency as those in the higher income brackets? Also, what if instead of 4 out of 5 rapes going unreported, maybe it were more like none, like they all get reported? Could that be arranged? How could that be arranged? Here's my hypothesis. I think women who make more than 15 grand a year get raped just as often, if not more often, as those who make under 15 grand a year. I think most of the women who don't call the cops when their husbands' live-in boyfriends rape them just happen to be from the middle or upper tiers of our society. And there's a way to test this hypothesis. Stratified rape shelters. If you're used to nicer things, and your middle or upper class husband rapes you, you get to go to a rape shelter that matches your previous lifestyle, provided that you call the cops on the man who raped you, your husband. Admittedly, to get this project off the ground, it would probably take private funding. I see a few billionaires chipping in on this. They're tired of rape, and they're tired of rape information being distorted, and that distortion leading to more rapes. Also, it would be something of a pet project to these billionaires. But then again, what isn't a pet project to people with that kind of money. I don't know much about politics, but a friend said that Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or George Soros might greenlight a project like this, or that Ted Turner, still affected by his uber socially conscious ex-wife Jane Fonda, also might lend a hand. And that I'm calling it a project? Sadly, I don't see it lasting very long. Its point would be made, or not, and then funding would almost assuredly dry up. A comparison would be public funds being diverted away from for-profit university sports and to Title IX interests. Sure, for a spell, we taxpayers can prop up money-losing sports teams, i.e. ones that aren't men's basketball and football, and this all adds to the awesomeness that is the college experience. But in the real world, decades of caviar and Gucci and trips to Europe, endless cruises around the Caribbean, catching the latest revue on Broadway, or hunting grizzlies in Siberia, more mani-pedis than you can shake a stick at, i.e. every day is a spa day, all that and more, all given away free? The only restriction being that your new boyfriend, along with all men, can't know the exact location of your posh shelter? No, long term, no way. But in the short term, why not? First things first, though. It must have a name change. Rape shelter sounds too accepting of the whole issue. Like, that's what I deserve, or something. It's not an issue of dereliction or moral depravity on her part. It's a decent woman getting away from a criminal. It's not, I, the helpless woman, need shelter. It's, he needed more structure in his life, i.e. prison, and now he has what he needed. It's a fresh start. It's renewal. It's an invigorating change. They should be called relocation renewal centers, or tulips in the rain, or something even more uplifting. No, tulips in the rain, that might sound flip or inappropriate, but I was trying to think of something like my favorite oddly named store, Birth of a Bear, a store where you design and sew your own teddy bear right there on site. What happens at these renewal centers? The goal is to get to a place of maintaining or improving on the previous lifestyle, but without the scaffolding, and almost from day one. The first few days spent at a renewal center are, of course, all about triaging and bandaging up that emotional trauma. Unfortunately, this part may seem too clinical, but a roadmap of recovery, something akin to the 5 stages of grief, needs to be outlined. Pamphlets pressed into her hand, gently laying out the process, and a lot of hugs, or long-distance hugs, if she finds any touch repulsive. No pressure at first, but it simply must be said that the relocation part of the new name just may involve her later, after the financial forensic team finalizes its report on her previous standing. She may get to stay there, but she may have to be moved to a facility in another state where she can try out her new name, just like the Witness Protection Program. The idea is to match pre-rape surroundings with post-rape surroundings. If it's too asymmetrical, not enough middle and upper crust victims will apply. They'll just continue getting raped by their husbands. But if it's too nice, then they may never want to leave. Hence my reference to scaffolding, which may involve going back to school, polishing up that resume, doing what it takes so that she can find herself not dependent upon a rapist, but also not living at, nor expected to live at, a renewal center for the rest of her life either. So a maximum might be 4 years if she's in school the entire time. Her schooling might require more than that, and I'm sure exceptions to the rules could be petitioned for. Child care is also all about corresponding to how it was before. Relocation to new names will probably be necessary while the rapist awaits trial, if he made bail, but his victims can move back to a renewal center near their home if he's in jail, and a prenup keeps the house in his name. Otherwise, if he's behind bars, the rape victim and her children can stay at home. Projected results? At first I thought, not much. Sure, we could find out that women who make over $15,000 a year get raped just as often as those who make less than $15,000 a year. It would be an informational improvement, and that's about all. Yes, knowledge is power and all that, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it would be a boon. Many more rapists would be behind bars, not raping women. Instead of middle and upper class women putting up with being raped an average of 2.9 times a year for years and years on end, the raping would stop immediately after that first rape. Even if he doesn't do much time, she'd be off in another state with a new name, a fresh outlook, and all she'd have to do is apply herself in school or however she chooses to rebuild, and chances are she just might shine in her new life. Downside? The sorting part is never easy. Nobody likes to be told they're not doing as well as they most certainly are. And no matter how many times they say, "Well, I never," lines will nonetheless have to be drawn and enforced. Many of those clearly and verifiably from the middle would insist on being relocated to a better center, turning up their middle-class noses in protest. Some who belong at a regular rape shelter would apply for admittance, only to be turned away. One good thing, though, is that phone calls to the police would be made after a cursory peek into a pocketbook, a quick glance at one's shoes, etc., but before formal entrance into the facility. In other words, for those contemplating on turning him in, but not 100% ready to burn that bridge just yet, those in charge of checking in new arrivals would be able to assure them, after a quick glance, of at least a few months of their worst accommodations, which would be their middle-class accommodations, much superior to a typical rape shelter, before they made that life-changing phone call. So if she's to be turned away, just barely missing the cutoff or whatever, she gets to know about this rejection before she either makes or doesn't make that all-important call to the police. If rejected, and if she doesn't turn in her man, she can at least apply for financial assistance to help offset the cost of renting video equipment with which to film his next rape, so she has a better chance of conviction. Overall, this idea may sound unconventional, but results? I guarantee a lot more rapists are going to be locked up. Sure, funding may be difficult to secure, probably too difficult, and long-term results would probably include the acquisitions of more mistresses and more prostitutes, but at least a lot fewer middle and upper-class women would have to suffer through repeatedly being raped. Change in the whole concept of trophy-wise? Maybe. Overall effect on the economy? More divorces, which would fuel economic growth, whereas a married couple used to share edifices, refrigerators, microwaves, and more. Now, as separate new singles, they would have to buy one of each, nearly doubling the economy for such consumer goods overnight. Plus, divorces create more singles who spend a lot of money trying to not be single. On the other economic hand, cosmetic surgeries, liposuction, facelifts, pretty much the whole beauty industry just might take a dive. If Mr's chances of getting away with raping the wife diminish and diminish, more wives are going to start taking liberties too, slacking off on the upkeep. That object that he used to think he owned, it'll become more and more simply her body, not his property. She'll be healthier internally, that is, eating right and not going to artificial and unhealthy extremes to be a skinnier, shinier trophy. In other words, for some of the too skinny and the smoking to stay skinny types, it will mean eating more, finally eating enough to actually be healthy, and not just looking healthy. Precedent? In a related way, French women get away with it because so many of them refuse to do it, shave under their arms, and the whole concept of orthodontia is just about non-existent in England. If a sizable chunk of American women all agreed at the same time to cut way back on the beauty bill, and they all stuck to their guns, mates would soon enough learn to accept this new look. By the way, a companion piece to this is Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth. Thank you, Ms. Wolf, for inspiring part of the last few minutes. Another companion piece is Lysistrata by Aristophanes. Thanks also go out to Barbara Ehrenreich, author of The Hearts of Men and many other titles. Anyway, there's more to this tulips in the rain theory found in my notes. Next time, Part 9, or Reaching Out versus Being Reached.